Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the Subcontinent. As you know, our program aims to address the most important issues in the South Asian region, what is going on, who are the key actors involved, what are the people saying, and how are the issues changing the future. All of this will be answered with the help of our team of experts and guests, so stay tuned.
In this episode of the Subcontinent, to commemorate Allameh Iqbal Lahori, we will take a look at the shared elements of the cultural and linguistic identity of Iran and the subcontinent. We will also examine the roots of the recent conflicts between Muslims and Hindus in the subcontinent that have been continuously increasing ever since the BJP took power in India.
November 9th was the birth anniversary of a man who was able to awaken the Islamic philosophy in the minds of Muslims across the subcontinent. Poet, philosopher, politician and Muslim Pakistani thinker Allameh Iqbal Lahori was well versed in literature, politics and philosophy. His Persian and Urdu poems have also received worldwide acclaim. Iqbal was a thinker with the pain and the concerns of Muslims on his mind. He used his words and thoughts to convey the secrets of the self to his fellow men in his own time and beyond. A lesson that seems more vital for Muslims to learn today, especially in this chaotic modern world.
Allameh Muhammad Iqbal was born on November 9, 1877 in Sialkot in the Punjab province of Pakistan. He was named Pakistan's national poet and was always making efforts to inform the population and free them from the bonds of colonialism. One of the greatest concerns of Allameh Iqbal was fortifying the belief of the nations of East in their own capabilities and creating unity among the Muslims of the world. He was one of the critics of the westernization of Eastern societies. In his lasting poems, many of which are in Persian, he has emphasized the importance of the return to self to his listeners. Iqbal believed that the poverty and the divide between East and West had occurred because of blind imitation of Western superficial life, instead of learning from their technological and scientific advancements and their success in the industry. On the other hand, he had understood that the basis and root of the East and Muslim world are humanism. That is why he saw it necessary to turn the attention of the Islamic world to this matter and has made profound points in this regard through his works. The language of choice for Iqbal in his poems is the language of the past poets of Iran and the subcontinent, a language that has flourished for around 9 centuries in this vast land and has left treasures of literary importance beyond to bring delight for generations to come.
ای غنچه خوابیده چو نرگس نگران خیز کاشانه ما رفت به تاراج غمان خیز از ناله مرغ چمن از بانگ اذان خیز از گرمی هنگامه آتش نفسان خیز خاور همه مانند غبار سر راهی است یک ناله خاموش و اثر باخته آهی است هر ذره این خاک گره خورده نگاهی است از هند و سمرقند و عراق و همدان خیز از خواب گران خواب گران خواب گران خیز از خواب گران خیز.
Iran and the subcontinent have enjoyed extended ties in culture, language, religion, art, trade and industry over the years. The origin of these ties can be traced back to the Indo-Aryan migration across the Iranian plateau. Back then, the combination of these two groups made up the Indo-Iranian branch, and they shared the same language and religion and were considered the same race. As time passed, these two nations divided into two groups, each residing in a new area, and so their ways of life and dispositions changed. However, the shared elements in their language and ethnic and culture never truly raptured. And after several decades, a new Persian Hindu-Islamic civilization was born.
Before the English language made its way to the subcontinent, hundreds of languages and dialects have existed throughout the centuries, and among them, Persian was considered to be the language of education, science and bureaucracy. Through the decades, India was not only the center of the Sanskrit cosmopolis, but had it also become part of the extra-regional Persian world and was influenced by the Persian language and culture. As Richard M. Eaton has expressed in his book India in the Persianate Age, not only did India accept the Persian language, but it was also quick to become a center for the manufacture of Persian culture. But in the 19th century, and with the expansion of the East come Englishmen, an exchange that would see the people of the subcontinent stray far from the rich culture of their predecessors.
Had the British not come into India in 1800s, you would not need an interpreter because we all used to speak Farsi. The court language for 600 years in India was Farsi.
Now, to have more insight, we are joined by Mr. Gohar Gilani, an author and journalist. First of all, welcome to the program, Mr. Gilani.
Thank you for having me in your show. Thank you very much.
As you know, November 9th is the birthday of Allameh Iqbal Lahori. So, what effect did the philosophy and thought of this great thinker have on the self-confidence and the unity of Muslims around the subcontinent?
You know that in the 20th century, there were several individuals, who played a key role in the revival and also the reform of Islam. And Allameh Iqbal, who is popularly known as Allameh Iqbal in South Asia and Iqbal Lahori in Persia, in Iran. So he is one among those intellectual contributors in that sense. He wanted to emulate some of those to bring Muslims, especially at that time there was turbulence in South Asia. There was British colonialism. India, the larger India, was under British control. And this man, Allameh Iqbal, then had several, kind of correspondences with Muhammad Ali Jinnah. And then, the rest of the history, this was also a period when there was a sort of decline in the Muslim world. And this was the beginning of the British colonial era. And it was at its peak, actually. So in that sense, the role that Allameh Iqbal played through his poetry and through his, body of work, and it could appeal to a large section of society, which included not only the youth, but also the children and also intellectual thinkers. So in that sense, he has played a significant role as far as Muslim unity and strength is concerned.
Mr. Gilani, we know that Iqbal Lahori has many poems in Persian. I wanted to see why was he so interested in the Persian language and literature, and what was the influence of Iranian poets and thinkers on his thoughts and works?
Interestingly, if you see his work at that time, this was the generation of our grandparents. He was born when 20 years after the mutiny, 1857 mutiny that took place against the British rulers. So Allameh Iqbal was born in 1877. As I said, at that time, there was a lot of influence also of Persian language in this entire region. And interestingly also, the part I come from, Kashmir, which is also referred to as Iran-e-Saghir, prototype of Iran. There was a lot of influence of Central Asia. And if you go back like 600, 700 years and you talk about Mir Sayyid Ali Hamdani, who came to Kashmir thrice, along with his 700 companions, which are known as Sadat. And in that sense, the influence of Persian language, it was also a court language in the Mughal era. And that language was part and parcel of the entire social fabric. It was a language which was spoken by our, grandparents' generation. And people from that era also used to attend Maulud gatherings. And also in mosques, there were a lot of manqabat and noha. All of that was written in Persian language. It is sort of an irony that right now this generation of ours does not have that kind of access to Persian language as people like Allameh Iqbal had. So there was a Persian language was kind of a bridge that connected this part of the world to the Iranian civilization. So there was that's why we see a lot of poems like Saki Nama, in which there is a lot of focus on economic awakening of the Kashmiri people, which Iqbal wrote in one of the Mughal gardens called the Nishad Gardens. So you see in that era, all the poets and all the writers from the subcontinent, the larger Indian subcontinent, they had a huge influence of the Persian language.
Mr. Gilani, we could say that with the beginning of British colonization and de-Persianization of the language in this region, the linguistic connection that existed for centuries between Iran and the Indian subcontinent was lost. What effect does this have on the separation of subcontinent culture from its ancient history and cultural heritage?
I would say the losses are huge. If you allow me to go back a little, it was not only of the rise of British colonialism, but in Europe we saw at the same time there was European fascism, and Muslim power was kind of on a decline, and the kind of role that Allameh Iqbal at that time played with his kind of worldview and what he gained from his experiences and his long travels to Europe and his interaction with the outside Western world. So that became a kind of a bridge, and people, started getting connected to it. And slowly and, gradually, when Persian language got removed from the courts, from the main, linguistic assets, so this automatically meant that whatever role as a bridge it played between the Iranian civilization and between the Muslim world and the people living in this part of the world, the Muslims of this world, so that connection got lost, and it kind of if you can use the word, it orphaned people of this land to this beautiful language, and through which other avenues and other windows were opened. So in that sense, it has been a huge literary loss. It has been huge, in terms of civilizational kind of an assault by removing that language from the official, as an official language, and introducing other languages which people do consider were alien to them, because with this language there was an emotional attachment, and that's why I'm saying that it has been, kind of people of this region have been, so to speak, orphaned of a wonderful language.
Thank you, Mr. Gilani. Thank you for being on the program. Since mid-October, Bangladesh has witnessed an abrupt increase in religious violence. These conflicts started with the Hindu religious celebrations after a post surfaced on social media in which the holy book of Quran was subject to disrespect in a Hindu palace of worship. This incident led to extreme violence and incineration of Hindu prayer houses, and was then met with retaliatory attacks against Muslims by Hindu extremists. A fire that burned all the way across Bangladesh and spread to a few other cities in India.
A spark that led to a devastating flame. At the time of the sacred Hindu festival of Durga Puja, a menacing picture in which the holy book of Muslims, the Quran, was disrespected circled social media platforms and led to the outrage of the 164 million Muslim majorities in Bangladesh. The ensuing rage in a series of violent retaliatory actions by both sides led to a few deaths and left hundreds injured in its wake. Mosques and temples were burned down one after another, continuing all the way to India. Both sides accused the governments. Some were aiming their dissent at the secular government of Sheikh Hasina Wajid and her silence against the disrespect by the Hindu minority that comprises 9% of the population. On the other hand, the extremist Modi government is accused of spreading anti-Islam policies in the country, which has to power a new wave of extremist groups in India. Experts have warned that if India and Bangladesh do not take immediate action to de-escalate the violence, the memories of killings from previous decades could come to life again.
Divide and conquer is the fundamental policy of the British Empire's colonization of the subcontinent and the source of all the pessimism and contradiction between India, Pakistan and Bangladesh. Although historical evidence proves that the various societies in the Indian subcontinent have never experienced absolute unity before the colonization, and there have never been any real distinguishing characteristics between the religions in the area, the differences have remained rather vague. But the division that was established by the colonialist masters eventually led to the segmentation of the subcontinent in 1947 according to religious differences. A festering wound caused by the hypocrisy of colonialism that the people of the subcontinent still suffer from every day.
History has proven that whatever takes place in India, as the largest country in South Asia, will create a significant ripple effect in the entire region. Bangladesh, with its ties during its 50 years of independence, has significant bilateral ties with India, along with their historic and cultural bonds. India was very helpful during the Bangladeshi fight for independence against Pakistan in 1971. This shared history and common historic bitterness of both states towards Pakistan have brought the two countries close and helped strengthen the bilateral ties between the countries through decades of cooperation. In the past decade, the bilateral agreement in 2015, aimed at resolving 70-year-old border conflicts, has fortified relations between the two nations more than ever. But there is a darker side to this relationship. With the rise of the extremist BJP in India, the country is on a declining path towards Hindu nationalism. This change in approach has had an undeniable impact on Indian foreign policy. Discriminatory policies implemented by the Indian government over the past few years, such as the citizenship law against Muslims, have negatively influenced the feeling of unity between India and its neighboring Muslim countries. India's gradual transformation to an ultra-nationalist state has been triggered by the Hindutva policy or Hindu-first policy. It is an obvious threat to bilateral ties between India and Bangladesh, brought about by strong ties between the leadership and the relations between the people of the two countries.
Now, to have more insight, we are joined by Roshan Mohammad Saleh, an editor at the British Muslim news website 5 Pillars. Now, Mr. Saleh, welcome to the program first of all. Recently, tensions between Hindus and Muslims in Bangladesh and India have intensified and some have been killed and injured. What is the main root of violence in this region?
Yeah, thanks for having me on Press TV. I think there's always been tensions historically in that region, in the subcontinent. But I think the latest round of violence basically started when social media rumors circulated about a Quran being desecrated in Western Bangladesh. And that obviously led to a lot of anger. And then there were attacks on Hindus. I think people did die, unfortunately, in those attacks. So things just kind of spiraled out of control to a certain extent. And then you had the so-called tit-for-tat attacks across the border in India. But I think generally we can say that that region, there have been tensions historically, especially since partition, when the British Empire, basically ran away from India. And you had lots of communal violence in 1947. Then you had the secession of Bangladesh, East Pakistan from West Pakistan. That led to tensions as well, because India helped Bangladesh achieve its independence. And then most recently you have the rise of Hindu nationalism embodied by the BJP ruling regime in India and its leader Modi. And of course there's this open wound, which is Kashmir. So I think historically the region has been a bit of a tinderbox, but it's been exacerbated lately by the rise of Hindu nationalism.
Now, Mr. Saleh, Hindus are a religious minority in Bangladesh and Muslims in India have almost the same situation. What is the relationship, if there is any, between the recent religious violence in Bangladesh and India?
I think there's no doubt that there is discrimination against minorities in both countries, but I do think it's a little bit misleading to compare India directly with Bangladesh. Bangladesh, I mean, it prides itself on being a secular state where everyone is equal under the law. In practice, the Hindu community have complained about discrimination, and I think some discrimination has taken place. But I don't think it's as systematic as it is in India, where you have a ruling regime which is discriminating against Muslims in the law, for example, through legislation, and is also encouraging its supporters to attack Muslims, where there is no redress whatsoever for Muslims. Whereas in Bangladesh, the authorities are now arresting Muslims, in effect, for attacks on Hindus. I doubt if the same thing is going to happen in India, because you have this kind of open season on Muslims there, which is encouraged at the highest levels of the Indian regime.
So, Mr. Saleh, who benefits from this religious strife and religious violence in the subcontinent? Who is the main winner and loser of this bloody violence?
Well, I think no doubt the biggest losers are the people of the region. The Muslims of Pakistan, the Hindus of India, the Muslims of Bangladesh, the Hindus of Bangladesh, the Muslims of India. Ultimately, it doesn't suit any of them, and everyone loses with this constant tension and war footing that these countries are on to a certain extent. You have a nuclear-powered or a nuclear India and a nuclear Pakistan. I think who benefits? I mean, I think it's pretty obvious that the Americans would like to keep the subcontinent divided. They don't want Pakistan and India becoming friends, and they kind of have relations and influence over both sides. And I'm sure they're inspiring some of this tension. We also have Israel, of course. Israel does not want a Muslim nation.
On that note, I would like to thank Mr. Saleh for his precious time, knowledge and insight. Now let's see how people have reacted on social media and cyberspace.
Salman Saeed says, since 70s till 90s, 75k Lakh Kashmiri Muslims lost their lives in two-nation conflicts in 25 years, and many women were also raped. Kashmiri Hindus in 1990 died in hundreds, and others had to leave, and the reason was the government and political issues, not a particular community's ideology. Mayak Pandey says, in this match we have to forget all our internal conflicts and just support our nation. Firstly, we all are Indians, and then we are Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, Christians, Buddhists, and so on. Anwar Hossain says, the conflicts between different religious groups, especially Hindu and Muslims, in Indian subcontinent was the divide and rule policy of the British colonialists, but we were so stupid to understand that. This divide and rule policy was so smoothly planned that we were busy fighting each other, hate each other, while they were ruling and looting us in every possible way.
And that was our episode about the shared elements of the cultural and linguistic identity of Iran and the subcontinent, and also the sudden increase in religious violence in Bangladesh. So, to watch the best bits and pieces of our show and more subcontinental updates, follow us on social media platforms and don't forget to give us your feedback. We shall meet again, same time, same day, next week. So till then, take care.